Hi, I'm Andy, and this is my lesson on string manipulation with loops in Java. In this lesson, I'll show you how to manipulate a string by iterating through it using a for loop and by repeatedly performing some actions with a while loop. Let's get started. String manipulation is a very common task. Often string data is input into a program in one format, but must be modified into another format. Let's write a program that does a simple string manipulation task. It removes all the spaces from that string. We're going to do this task two ways. First with a for loop and then with a while loop. For many tasks, one type of loop is preferable to the other, but in this case, I like both techniques equally. Let's start by asking the user to enter a sentence, and then we'll store that input in a string reference. We also need to make a string object called no spaces, which will eventually contain all the sentence's characters except for the spaces. Notice we should initialize that string to an empty string. The loop will then fill it with the correct characters. Now we'll use a for loop to iterate through the string. Iterating through a string means visiting each character in the string one after the other and performing some action. To help us out, let's remember how a string's characters are stored. In particular, remember that the first character in a string is at index 0. For example, if the user enters the sentence, "It sure is rainy today," the characters will be stored like this. Also, recall what the string's length method does. It returns the number of characters in the string. In this case, the characters go from index 0 to index 21, so the length is 22. Notice that, to iterate through the string, we need to visit each index from 0 to the string's length minus 1. So let's write our for loop. We'll use I to represent the index our code is currently visiting. As I just mentioned, the first index our code needs to visit is index 0. And the last index it needs to visit is length minus 1. So we can either put I less than or equal to sentence.length minus 1 here, or I less than sentence.length. Both work equally well. Out of habit, I tend to use the less than version. Now each time through the loop, I needs to move on to the next index. We do that by increasing I by 1. The loop body needs to do a couple of things. First, let's just get the letter at index I. We use the substring method for that. Remember, the substring method grabs the characters from this index up to, but not including, this index. So this line of code will grab just one character, the character at index I. Now we need to check to see if this character is not a space. If so, we need to add it to our no spaces string. We do that by first concatenating no spaces and letter together, like this. This will make a new string with letter appended to no spaces. We then want to store the address to this new string in no spaces, like this. Recall, there's a shortcut way of doing this using plus equals. Let's use the shortcut so our code is as concise as possible. If it is a space, we do nothing. We simply ignore it. So there's no need for an else right here. And that's basically it. Let's print out no spaces and make sure our code works. Okay, let's comment out our for loop and do the same task with a while loop. First, we'll make a no spaces string, but this time we'll initialize it with all the characters from sentence. And then we'll find the index of the first space in no spaces and store it as space index. Remember, if space index is greater than -1, a space was found in the no spaces string. Now we'll use a while loop to repeatedly remove spaces from no spaces until none are left. So we put while space index is greater than -1. In the loop body, we need to first remove the space from no spaces. We have its index, so removing it should be pretty easy. The problem is that string objects are immutable. They can't be changed. So there's no way to actually remove a character from a string object. However, you can make a new string object with all the same characters as the old one, minus the space. That's exactly what we'll do. In our earlier example, here's the two substrings we want to concatenate together into a new string. To do that, we get the substring from 0 to space index and the substring from space index plus 1 onward. And we want to store the address of this new string in no spaces. That way, no spaces will be constantly tweaked until it is the string we want, the full sentence without the spaces. Okay, after removing the space, we need to update our space index variable. Again, once no spaces no longer has any spaces, this line of code will set space index to -1 and our while loop will terminate. Okay, let's give it a shot and see if it worked just as well as our for loop did. Great. So that's two different ways to remove the spaces from a string. The for loop iterated through each character one at a time, while the while loop kept removing spaces until no more were left. Both algorithms were easy to understand and worked well. Which you choose in cases like this is entirely up to you. And that wraps up this lesson on string manipulation with loops in Java. I'm Andy. Thanks for watching and coding with me today.